What would you do if you sat down in the exact seat you paid for, correct ticket, correct name, correct flight, only to be yanked up by a flight attendant, mocked in front of everyone, just because you didn't look like someone who belongs in first class? This isn't a movie. This isn't a stage clip made to go viral. This is a true story on a commercial flight from Seattle to New York, where a woman quietly took seat 1A and no one expected her silence would shake an entire industry. And just 37 minutes after takeoff, the entire cabin crew was placed under internal surveillance. Why? Who was she? And how did one woman's calm refusal lead to an entire cabin losing control? Seattle-Tacoma International Airport at 5:47 a.m. wasn't exactly crowded, but it wasn't quiet either. The automatic doors slid open rhythmically, and passengers walked in with tired eyes, dragging suitcases, children, coffee, and itineraries. Over the PA system, a female voice issued emotionless instructions. Maintain order, maintain distance, stay at the correct gate. A few people listened. Most didn't. But there was one person who didn't need to listen at all. She already knew every step. Lenora Blake was not new to flying. She didn't need to look at the flight boards, didn't need to check the gate, didn't need to ask anyone. She wore a navy blue blazer that fit like it was custom tailored, her hair pulled into a low bun, lips bare of lipstick, walking with a quietness that made people turn around without knowing why. A worn black leather bag rested on her left shoulder. No jewelry, no smile, no attempt to appear friendly. She headed straight to the priority area like the path belonged to her, and in a way it did. Gate C12, Valair Flight 4, 72 to New York. First class cabin with 6 seats. Seat 1A was hers. It was confirmed on a manifest visible only to select individuals. And if anyone failed to see her name there, the issue wasn't the name, it was the system. She stepped up to the small digital board to the left of the boarding gate, glanced at it for a second, then continued walking. No need to pause. No need to verify. The passengers around her wore hoodies, flip-flops, yoga pants. They looked at her, then looked away. No one greeted her. No one asked anything. She didn't need them to. Boarding was called. First class was invited first. Lenora was the first to walk up the jet bridge. Not in a hurry, not slow, not avoiding anyone. The path to the aircraft cabin was like a white-lit tunnel, LED lights reflecting off the floor and her polished black shoes. No one walked ahead of her, and when she stepped into the first-class cabin, no one smiled in welcome. There was only one person, Tessa Landon, standing and folding napkins near the galley. Tessa wore a crisp flight attendant uniform, blonde hair, fair skin, standing upright with an expression that tried to look busy. But when her eyes met Lenora's, the busy look evaporated in a blink. "Ma'am, are you looking for someone?" The question wasn't incorrect, but it was loaded. Lenora looked directly at her. "Number I'm in 1A. Tessa didn't invite her to sit. She stepped back half a step, holding a tablet, a thin smile forming. "May I see your boarding pass?" Lenora raised her phone. The QR code was crisp and clear. Seat 1A, Valair 472, matching date and time. Tessa glanced, didn't scan, didn't tap confirm, just looked. "This says 1A, but I don't see a Blake on our pre-cleared first manifest," she said, her voice softer but colder. "Maybe it's a last-minute error. If you got a gate upgrade, that wouldn't show up yet. I'll need you to return to the main cabin while we check with ground crew." Lenora didn't move. "I didn't get an upgrade," she replied. "Then I'm afraid I can't allow you to remain in this seat without verified clearance," Tessa said, her tone gaining firmness. A man in seat 2C with salt and pepper hair let out a chuckle. "People really try it, huh?" Lenora placed her phone on her lap. No reaction, no anger. She simply lifted the phone to her ear and said clearly, "Confirm trace. Begin shadow protocol." Tessa squinted. "Are you calling someone about this?" Lenora didn't answer. A second later, the cabin lights flickered, then flickered again. The tablet in Tessa's hand flashed. Connection lost. The intercom sputtered static, then silence. The entire cabin felt like it had been unplugged, gently but with certainty, and no one knew what had just happened. Tessa reached for her walkie. No signal. She looked around, then leaned down to move Lenora's bag. Lenora didn't stop her, but as Tessa's hand touched the strap, a small object slipped out. A black card, no logo, no name, only a laser-engraved serial number. It slid across the floor and stopped near seat 1C. Tessa bent down to pick it up, squinting at it, then laughed. Cute! Did you order this online? She held it up like a toy. Passengers began to notice. A young man in seat 3A raised his phone and started recording. No one stopped him. Tessa looked around, then raised her voice so the whole cabin could hear. We have a passenger attempting to occupy a first-class seat without manifest clearance. Please remain calm while we resolve this. Lenora still didn't move. Tessa walked toward the cockpit. I'm notifying the captain. But as she touched the intercom door, it clicked, and a robotic male voice announced, Override confirmed. Cabin lockdown in effect. No one in the cabin said a word, but every pair of eyes now looked in one direction. Lenora Blake, seat 1A. The woman who didn't argue, who didn't raise her voice, who simply sat down and issued one command. And now the cabin was locked. Tessa stepped back, still holding the black card like it had just morphed from fake to dangerous. She looked at Lenora, then at the cabin control panel, then at the other passengers. Jaden Knox, the young man recording, kept filming. A passenger in 2D whispered to their neighbor. A young couple in 3B exchanged glances. No one laughed. No one sneered. Not anymore. The air in the cabin had changed. No longer the casual indifference of an early flight. Now it was the silence before a storm. Tessa forced a smile. She walked to the front of the cabin and spoke in a voice higher than usual. We're experiencing a minor technical issue with the onboard system. Please remain calm. We'll resolve it shortly. No one responded. No nods, no acknowledgments. Just eyes. Lenora said nothing. She sat upright, hands on her lap, eyes forward, as if nothing unusual was happening. But everyone knew. Something was, and she was at the center of it. Tessa tried the tablet again. Still black. The cruise system flickered weakly. The intercom tried to reboot, then died. The cabin dimmed slightly. Not a power outage. More like someone was adjusting the lighting remotely. Then the overhead screen lit up. White text on black background. Cabin audit initiated. CEO presence verified. Silent review in progress. A wave of whispers swept through. Tessa stared at the screen, lips moving silently. This isn't possible. She stepped toward Lenora again. Ma'am, I'm going to have to kindly ask you to... Lenora turned for the first time since boarding and looked Tessa directly in the eye. You already gave up more than you realize. The words weren't loud, not sharp, but they landed like a blow to Tessa's mind. She froze. Then a soft ping sounded from the overhead control panel. The cabin lights shifted to a cool white tone. The screen changed. Performance evaluation active. All crew under review. Jaden, the one filming, pulled a slim wallet from his jacket. He opened it, revealing a press badge. Said nothing. Just nodded toward Lenora. She didn't respond. Moments later, from the main cabin, a middle-aged man walked through the curtain like it wasn't even there. He wore a charcoal gray blazer, white shirt, no tie. His expression showed nothing but calm. He stood in the aisle directly facing Tessa. Marcus Layton, he said, his tone steady like he'd said it 100 times. Valair Security, Cyber Division. I've been monitoring from row 9. Tessa's mouth opened. We didn't receive any incident report. Marcus didn't blink. You didn't because this wasn't escalated through normal channels. Someone in this cabin attempted to manually remove seat 1A from the flight manifest. That constitutes a level 1 interference with security protocols. The entire cabin fell dead silent. Lenora still hadn't spoken. Marcus stepped left, closer to her, and gave a respectful nod. Authorization confirmed. Seat 1A belongs to Lenora Blake, Chief Executive Officer of Valair International. No one uttered a word, but the faintest sounds, a gasp, a glass clink, rang like sirens in the silence. Tessa stood frozen, still holding the black card. Marcus took it back from her. This is not a toy, he said. It's biometric keyed. You had no clearance to touch it. The overhead display updated. Cabin team performance being logged. Passive monitoring active. Lenora still hadn't said a word, but now her gaze shifted to Marcus. A subtle nod. Marcus continued, this time addressing the entire cabin, not just Tessa. All further interactions will be logged and transmitted directly to corporate compliance. Do not attempt to override any system until this audit is complete. A woman in seat 3A raised her phone higher, hand trembling slightly. Her screen showed a live stream. Over 11,000 viewers and rising. Tessa looked around. Her eyes started to well up, but she didn't cry. Not because she was strong, but because she didn't yet understand what she was facing. She stepped back. Lenora glanced at the glass of water on her tray. Didn't touch it. A young male attendant approached from the rear. Ben. He carried a tray of water, his face tense. Would you like something to drink, Miss Blake? The question wasn't service. It was permission. Lenora didn't look at him, only at his hand. He placed the glass down gently, said nothing more. Lenora spoke slowly. You don't owe me anything, but you owe them context. The words pierced the cabin like a pin to a balloon. The screen changed again. HQ ping received. Remote HR visibility active. Marcus touched his earpiece, nodded, then turned to Lenora. Audit in motion. Tessa slumped into a jump seat near the galley, twisting a napkin into a useless string, her eyes wide, empty. She didn't realize the cabin had already changed forever, from the very moment she failed to recognize that blue blazer as the final warning. Tessa yanked the bag from Lenora's lap, and the moment the contents hit the floor, a single black ID card slid out, face up, glowing faintly. The card bore no name, no title, just a sleek barcode embedded deep beneath its surface, pulsing once like it was alive. Tessa smirked, holding it up between two fingers. Did you order this online? Looks like one of those fake VIP badges from TikTok. She dropped it back on the ground with a careless flick. Seat 2D, Jaden Knox, pulled out his phone slowly, not to check his texts, but to record. Something in him whispered, record this. Now as the camera began rolling, the air inside the cabin changed. Not metaphorically, literally. The hum of power dipped. The overhead lights blinked once, then again, then died. There was no announcement, no overhead chime, no emergency protocol voice, just silence, the wrong kind. An older woman in 3C whispered, "Is that normal?" No one answered, because then the floor beneath the cabin emitted a subtle click, then another, like a locked ceiling. Jaden's camera caught the exact moment the cabin screens flickered to life, all at once, every single one, even those previously turned off. Black background, white text, bold and sharp. Override confirmed. Cabin lockdown engaged. Audit in progress. A sharp gasp from somewhere in row 4. Someone's water bottle clattered to the floor. No one moved. No one spoke. And Lenora Blake? She hadn't twitched. She sat exactly as she had before, as if nothing had happened, as if she expected every bit of this. Jaden whispered into his phone, "I think this lady owns the airline." No music, no seatbelt signs. The control panel above each seat had gone black. The ambient hum of the HVAC system was gone too. The only sound now, the faint buzz of circuitry deep in the walls, and the blinking red diode beside the forward galley door. Tessa took a step back, visibly rattled. Her lips parted but no sound came out. She turned to the galley trying to activate the intercom. Nothing. Dead. She turned to her colleague Ben, who just stepped out from the curtain to see what the hell was going on. "The system's frozen," she hissed. "Everything's down." Ben looked up. "This happened once last year. A power cycling error." "This is not a power cycle, Ben," Tessa snapped. "It's intentional." From row 4, a passenger spoke up. Calm even. "Ma'am, is this part of a drill?" Another asked, "Is this flight hijacked?" Tessa was about to respond when the cabin lights came back on. But not the usual soft yellow. This was a stark, hospital-grade white. Unflattering, bright, almost surgical. The kind of light that left no shadows. Then over the speakers, a voice, genderless, digitized but unmistakably authoritative. Cabin audit in effect. Crew performance under evaluation. Passengers remain seated. Any attempt to interfere will be recorded and escalated. Jaden's camera caught it all, even his own stunned expression. Ben looked at Lenora, then at the screen above her seat that now displayed primary subject verified. Observation level 1. Tessa's knees wobbled slightly. She turned to Lenora again. Who are you? Lenora blinked, finally speaking. The question is, why did it take a screen to make you ask that? The words were soft, but they hit like thunder. Tessa opened her mouth, then closed it. Her hands were trembling. She reached for the side panel to call the cockpit, but the screen lit up before she touched it. Pilot communication suspended. Manual override by executive keycard. Secondary authority pending. In other words, the cockpit had been locked out from the outside. A flight attendant in the back of first class turned pale. We've lost all outbound. The passengers were now in full whisper mode. A man in business attire muttered, "She's not just a VIP." A college-age girl holding a neck pillow said, "She's like the founder or something." Jaden leaned forward, eyes wide, filming. "I'm telling y'all, this is a damn CEO. She's testing them." Ben tried to reestablish some order. "Folks, please remain calm. We're experiencing a system-wide update. There's no emergency." His voice cracked mid-sentence. On screen, a new message appeared. Emergency override. Do not approach seat 1A. Tessa backed away. Her voice was barely audible. "She's watching everything, isn't she?" Lenora didn't nod, didn't smirk, just sat, still, upright, perfectly in control. And then the next screen line hit like a hammer. Tessa Landon, interaction history flagged, awaiting review. Everyone turned to Tessa. Her hands shot up. "This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything wrong. I followed protocol." She turned to Ben. "Didn't I? You saw it. She didn't have a boarding pass. Her ID was fake." Lenora looked up. "Fake to you, because you weren't taught what real authority looks like when it doesn't match your assumptions." Another beat of silence. Then a new message appeared. Cross-referencing employee incident logs. "Stand by." Jaden whispered to himself. "We're not on a flight. We're in a tribunal." Tessa's voice cracked. "You're auditing me?" Lenora finally looked directly into her eyes. "No, Tessa. You audited yourself, the moment you made a decision before asking a question." Ben sat down slowly in the jump seat, his mouth slightly open. One of the first-class passengers, a woman in pearls, leaned toward her husband. "I feel like I'm in a movie." Another passenger said aloud, "Is this going to be on the news?" Tessa looked toward the curtains separating them from economy. "Please," she said, "someone back me up." A voice from the rear said, "We saw everything." Another added, "You treated her like trash before she said a word." Tessa's shoulders sank. The screen now read, "Initial findings logged. Corporate review will continue post-landing." A pause, then, "Do not attempt to reset systems." Ben whispered, "We're locked until we land." Lenora reached down, slowly, and picked up her ID card from the floor. It glowed faintly again, as if acknowledging her touch. She placed it back in her blazer, looked forward, didn't speak. A long beat of silence, then one final message. Cabin lockdown maintained. You may now proceed as guests. The lights softened slightly. The screen dimmed. Jaden kept recording. Tessa didn't move. Part 3. The man who walked up from coach, half one half. From behind the curtain separating first class from economy, a man stepped forward. Tall, calm, wearing a simple black coat with a silver pin on the lapel. He walked the narrow aisle as if it belonged to him, eyes steady, not scanning side to side. The curtain behind him still swayed gently, as if reluctant to let him go. In his hand was a card, not a standard passenger badge. It was a level 5 access key within the Valair system. His voice was composed but not soft. "Marcus Layton, systems engineer on board this flight, Valair International, requesting temporary access to perform a cabin systems check." The first-class cabin froze. Tessa blinked. "You came from economy?" Marcus didn't answer. He scanned his card at the nearest control panel. The indicator light turned green. He stepped to the central interface console near the galley and began entering a string of commands only senior engineers would know. The screen lit up, and the technical UI appeared. Code began to scroll. Marcus watched it closely, then frowned. Someone attempted to remove Seat 1A from the system, he said. This is classified as data tampering of a criminal level. The space went silent. Lenora said nothing. Jaden's camera recorded every second. Tessa's face drained of color. Ben, seated nearby, shifted slightly. Why would someone... Marcus cut him off. Only 2 people on this flight have the clearance to do that, and one of them is standing in this room. He turned. Seat 1A was reserved specifically for Lenora Blake, Chief Executive Officer of Valair International. A wave of shock swept across first class. The man in 3A whispered, "She's been sitting there since boarding." Another passenger started to speak but couldn't finish. Tessa stammered, "No one told us." The manifest... Marcus raised a hand. The manifest was altered. The digital ID token was scrubbed. But the original system logs don't lie. She's not just a passenger. She's the reason this flight exists. Ben looked like he might faint. A sharp beep rang out. A new system log popped up. Marcus nodded. Confirmed. The manual deletion occurred 37 minutes before boarding. Jaden zoomed in on the screen. Holy hell! The truth was no longer hidden. It had been programmed. Then someone tried to erase it. And that someone might be just a few steps away from her. Tessa's lips trembled. Her voice broke. "No, I didn't." Marcus kept going. The system displayed detailed timestamps. This is when the deletion command was issued. From a device in Concourse B, access credentials. T. Landon 47. His eyes locked onto Tessa. "You deleted it." Her face went white. I didn't mean... Marcus stepped closer. Either you did it yourself or someone used your login. Either way, you violated a security protocol. And on that basis alone, this cabin audit is entirely justified. Ben whispered, "Tessa," but she shook her head. "There's been a mistake." She turned toward Lenora. "You didn't say who you were." Lenora remained composed, replying softly, "And you didn't ask. You assumed." Each word floated gently, but there was no undoing them. Jaden swung his camera between the 2 women, capturing a tension so sharp it felt like it could tear the air. The passengers no longer whispered. They held their breath, as if each word now kept the plane itself from unraveling. Marcus turned to face the entire first-class cabin. "Every action since you boarded this aircraft has been recorded. Audio, facial expression, location. This aircraft is equipped with a closed-loop behavioral analysis system, and right now, that system is observing how each of you reacts to the truth." He turned back to the cabin console and entered another command. A 3D model appeared, a simplified map of the cabin. Every spot where Tessa had stood lit up red, alongside playback of conversations, facial expressions, biometric reactions, voice tone, eye movement, thermal signatures, all presented in cold, technical precision. "Valair does not believe in public shaming," Marcus said, "but the company believes in system transparency." Tessa backed into the wall, eyes wet. "This is humiliating." Marcus paused. "Only if you forget this data is for internal review. The public won't know, unless you make it worse." From the economy section, a few heads peeked through the curtain. They didn't know what was happening. System test? Company experiment? But they didn't look away. The overhead screen changed again. Primary identity verified. Full cabin audit authority, Lenora Blake. Another line followed, cabin priority access restored. The first-class seating map shifted. Seat 1A glowed gold. Lenora remained still, posture unchanged. Marcus turned to her, no longer a systems engineer, but a subordinate awaiting instruction. "Would you like me to proceed with the audit, Ms. Blake?" Lenora raised a single finger. "One more test." Her gaze landed on Tessa. "Let's see what she does, now that she knows the whole truth." And then, silence. Just as the cabin began returning to a state of uneasy normalcy, The overhead LED lights across the aircraft subtly shifted color. From the warm amber they were before, every strip now turned a cool, sterile blue, casting an icy hue over the stunned faces below. No one knew what was happening, and then a single beep. Not loud, not urgent, but unmistakably clear. Every personal screen in front of each passenger lit up simultaneously. Same moment, same interface. A line of white text appeared across black screens. Cabin audit in progress, all crew under evaluation. Jaden Knox, still clutching his phone, held his breath and glanced down at his own screen. The video he had filmed just minutes earlier of flight attendant Tessa Landon yanking Lenora's bag and sneering was now playing in the center of the aircraft. Not on social media, not as a slow viral clip, but live, on every device, every seat back, every pair of eyes now watching. Lenora Blake sat unmoved in seat 1A, upright, silent. That stillness, under the pale blue lighting, transformed the cabin into something like an invisible courtroom, where power no longer rested in uniforms, but in the actions that had occurred mere minutes ago. A voice came through the cabin speaker system. Not the captain, not automated. It was female, low and cold, with the clarity of something algorithmically generated, but unmistakably built for one task: surveillance. Crew behavior analysis in progress. Irregular interaction sequence detected. Level 3 response protocol activated. The screens instantly shifted to a split layout. On the left, a cabin front camera feed. On the right, footage of the recorded incident. In the center, a chain of personnel IDs and numbers, all linking to the current flight crew. Tessa Landon stood frozen in the aisle, one hand halfway to adjusting her hair. But now everyone was staring at her, not with the doubt from minutes earlier, but with a mix of disbelief, realization, and shame. A female passenger in seat 2C, the same one who'd laughed and said, "People really try it, huh?" now stared at her screen, face drained of color. That very quote echoed back from Jaden's video like a living artifact of prejudice and dismissal. The woman instinctively pulled her coat higher over her face. At that same moment, a new sound chimed near the mid-cabin door. A man in a white dress shirt, wearing a silver-striped ID badge, stepped up from the rear section of the aircraft. No one recognized him, but the shift in the crew's expressions said everything. One whispered, "Internal aviation oversight?" But it was too late. The man walked to the front row, without looking at Lenora, without acknowledging the passengers. He activated a handheld device, scanning the cabin control panel mounted near the exit door. A ping echoed, followed by an encrypted code line flashing across the system. Override trace active. Unauthorized suppression detected. CEO protocol was masked. The air in the cabin turned heavier, not from a lack of oxygen, but from the weight of truth. A truth that could no longer be denied. Someone, within the flight crew, had deliberately overwritten CEO Lenora Blake's presence from the 1A manifest. This was no longer a system glitch. It was executive-level data falsification, and by federal aviation code, a criminal act. Jaden, still filming, said nothing, but his live stream had passed 2 million viewers in under 20 minutes. Comments poured in like floodwater. "Wait, she's really the CEO? OMG, I flew this route last month. Why would anyone think she didn't belong just because of a blue blazer? Who is Tessa? Can she even keep her job after this?" Lenora slowly turned to the man with the handheld device and asked, without raising her voice, "Has the source of the override been located?" He nodded. "We've traced the breach. The authority shift was executed from a cabin terminal, not from the mainframe. That means it was a manual intervention, and the individual responsible is aboard this flight." The statement dropped like a silent earthquake. Passengers began glancing around. The crew visibly tensed. Those who had dismissed her minutes ago now avoided her gaze. But Lenora wasn't looking for apologies. She simply kept her eyes on the screen, where real-time footage of each person's behavior continued to play back. And then, something no one expected happened. The screen at each seat began to change. No longer playing Jaden's footage. Instead, a series of clips appeared. Camera angles of crew conduct, facial responses, spoken words, and body language from the moment of boarding until now. Each one embedded with timelines and tagged by AI-driven behavior markers. A young woman in 4D whispered, "They're being watched like a live reality show." Another voice muttered, "No, this is a tribunal in the sky." Lenora didn't react. She simply pulled out her phone, opened a secure app, and tapped a single command. Unlock Phase 2, Behavioral Archive. A series of encrypted signals fired off. And this time, it wasn't just the passengers in the cabin who were seeing what was about to unfold. The cabin remained as silent as if an invisible sheet of glass had descended, sealing every movement, every word. The plane was still flying, but it felt like it was moving through a parallel reality, where every action, every glance, every breath was being analyzed. The passengers no longer felt mere pressure. There was a strange new sensation, as if they were being seen through. None of them had ever experienced a flight like this before, and they all understood now that something much larger had just happened, and it wasn't over yet. Lenora Blake sat in seat 1A, upright, silent. No one approached her, no one dared to ask her anything, and no one wore the same dismissive expression they had just an hour earlier. The lighting in the cabin had shifted to a soft white, no longer the icy audit blue, but not quite the warm glow from the start either. It felt like a place waiting for judgment. Marcus Layton, the senior systems engineer who had revealed Lenora's true identity, stood less than 2 steps away. But he didn't look at her, nor did he glance at the passengers. He was in direct communication with headquarters via his handheld device. Flight 472, cabin evaluation still active. Protocol breach has been confirmed. Data suppression originated from cabin terminal. Visual stream has been approved for compliance network. A brief silence followed his statement. Then a slow, firm male voice came through Marcus's device. Headquarters is now watching. Instantly, the small display above the front row, where announcements like "Fasten seatbelt" or "No smoking" usually appeared, shifted to white letters on a black background. Compliance stream active, CEO present. The entire cabin seemed to freeze. A few passengers subtly adjusted their posture, like they were being surveilled. And in fact, they were. A young flight attendant, Olivia, stood near the galley door, her face visibly shaken with confusion and fear. She had never been trained for a scenario where a CEO's identity was scrubbed mid-flight, and she certainly wasn't prepared for what she had just witnessed. But then she saw Lenora doing something unexpected. Lenora slowly reached down and opened a cloth tote beneath her seat. Not a luxury handbag, not crocodile leather like most would imagine a billion-dollar airline CEO to carry, just a worn, frayed canvas bag. She pulled out a photograph, not large, not glossy, a faded print, yellowed with age. In the photo was a small group of people standing in front of an old Valair aircraft. At the center, a young woman in a flight attendant uniform, braided hair, an imperfect smile. But the eyes gleamed with something unmistakable, the beginning of a dream. Lenora raised the photo to chest level, saying nothing. But Olivia, the young attendant, recognized it instantly. Her breath caught as she blurted, almost involuntarily, "That's you? You were a flight attendant?" Lenora nodded gently. She didn't smile. No one else in the cabin said a word. Tessa Landon, the one who had ripped open her bag, the one who had sneered, "Did you book online?" now stepped back, as if the gaze of Lenora's past was physically pushing her away. The air inside the cabin grew so dense it felt like it could be sliced with a knife. Jaden Knox was still recording, though his hand trembled slightly. He zoomed slowly onto the photo in Lenora's hands, then panned up to her face. Her silence wasn't cold. It was a quiet kind of strength that made people look inward. Jaden knew the footage he was capturing wouldn't just be internet news. It was part of something larger, a moment where anyone watching would find themselves reflected, either as someone who had once judged another by their clothing, or as someone who had been dismissed and silenced. Marcus gave Lenora a subtle nod, a signal that identity verification was now fully complete. The audit is complete, data stream verified, suppression tag has been recorded, chain of custody intact. A female voice from the system replied, "Compliance lock will remain until final review. CEO presence validated. Staff records now under external oversight." The digital display above them shifted again. "Post-audit review pending. Internal tribunal notified." It was as if no one in the cabin dared to exhale. They had gone from doubting a quiet woman in 1A to witnessing her confirmed as the CEO of the airline, and now, learning she had once been one of the silent workers in the same uniform as those currently on board. Lenora slowly returned the photo to her bag. She didn't look at anyone, but every pair of eyes was now on her. No more contempt, no more doubt, only recognition. An elderly man, the same one who had grumbled when she boarded, murmured under his breath, "God, I think I saw her 20 years ago on a flight to Denver." A young woman in seat 3F dabbed her eyes with a tissue, perhaps not from sorrow, but from shame. Inside the front of the cabin, the ceiling lights flickered once again, not as an error, but as an alert to the crew that the external audit signal had ended. But the review wasn't over. A post-flight tribunal would begin the moment they landed. The crew would be summoned. Every phrase caught on audio, including "you probably booked online" and "regular passengers don't sit in 1A, would become part of an official record. Lenora tapped a button on her wristwatch, and a device in the rear seat buzzed in response. Marcus retrieved it, opened a secure interface, and nodded. "The audit file has been sent to federal oversight. No one on this plane can edit or delete it now." Lenora said nothing. She simply closed her eyes for 3 seconds, as if remembering something. Then she opened them and looked out the window. In the eastern sky, the sun had begun to rise higher. The landing gear touched down on JFK's runway at exactly 7:08 a.m. A soft jolt echoing through the fuselage like the exhale of something long held in. Yet no one stood. No seatbelts clicked. No overhead bins opened. Flight 472 now felt less like a commercial flight and more like a sealed evaluation chamber, where every glance was directed toward the woman seated in 1A. Lenora Blake didn't move. Her gaze remained fixed forward, cold and unshakable. She didn't need to signal. The entire Valair internal system had already been activated, and everything was operating without a word from her lips. Tessa Landon, still visibly shaken from the first-class confrontation, clutched her radio and tried to connect with ground operations. All she received was static, no response. The crew tablet in her hand, which normally displayed passenger manifests and logistics, now blinked with a single line of text. "Lockdown protocol, CEO on board." The aircraft door did not open. The jet bridge did not connect. A group of individuals in black suits stood outside. Not TSA, not standard ground staff. In their hands were biometric control devices, a clear indication that this was a high-level internal investigation unit from Valair. Leading them was Marcus Layton, now dressed in a formal suit instead of a technical uniform, his ID tag now reading Regional Director of Investigations. He nodded to Lenora, then addressed the crew. "No one is to disembark until verification is complete. Cabin authority has been transferred." The air inside the cabin thickened. No one spoke. Not even the ones who had laughed when Lenora was asked to vacate 1A. Now they looked at each other, confused, ashamed, and afraid. Because the truth was undeniable. The woman they had dismissed wasn't just a legitimate passenger. She was the head of the entire airline. Tessa swallowed hard and took a step back. She gripped her crew pad tightly, her voice trembling. I didn't know who she was." But the words rang hollow. Too late. Too convenient. Marcus raised his hand, and an investigator stepped forward, taking the crew pad from Tessa. He scanned her biometric ID, then said coldly, "Duty temporarily suspended under Article 9. Breach of Executive Passenger Protocol." A ripple of murmurs moved through the back of the plane. Jaden, the passenger who had filmed everything from the beginning, was quietly continuing his live stream. A new message suddenly lit up across the cabin's central digital display. "Live stream authorized. Cabin audit public feed active." And then the cabin jolted again, this time not from turbulence, but from the sight of their own faces, being broadcast as part of Valair's passenger service transparency system. At the rear of the plane, a young flight attendant named Carla began to cry. She whispered, I studied about the Valair CEO in training, but I never thought she still watched individual flights. A colleague placed a hand on her shoulder and nodded, as if the quiet presence of Lenora Blake had now transcended theory. Outside the jet bridge, the press had already arrived. A female reporter from CBS pushed her way to the front, microphone in hand. We've received internal reports that an executive-level breach occurred aboard Flight 472. Can you confirm? Airport security held them back, but they couldn't stop the wave that had already begun. The hashtag number sign Seat 1A had reached the #1 trending spot on Twitter in just 35 minutes. Tweets flooded in. She didn't raise her voice. She just sat down, and the entire system trembled. Inside the aircraft, Marcus leaned slightly toward Lenora, speaking just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Madam CEO, the board is online. They're requesting an official statement, or at least a signal to proceed. Lenora nodded. From her blazer pocket, she pulled a small black device, no larger than her palm, and pressed the center button. The entire cabin went dark for 1 second, then returned to full brightness as the overhead display changed. Executive clearance confirmed. CEO Blake active. For the first time since landing, the captain's voice came through the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rhodes. As per internal directive from Valair headquarters, we ask for your continued cooperation while final operational assessments are completed. Thank you. Not a single voice objected. For the next 15 minutes, a special audit team moved row by row, collecting statements and verifying conduct. Every word, every expression from the crew was cross-checked against Jaden's original footage. Valair's AI-based behavior analysis flagged discrepancies, inappropriate tone, and any hint of falsification. Tessa sat silently, avoiding eye contact. When Marcus reached her row, he said only one thing. The worst part wasn't that she was in seat 1A. The worst part was that you never considered a black woman, dressed simply, could possibly belong there. Lenora didn't leave the aircraft immediately. She remained seated until all passengers had been interviewed, the crew separated, and the door officially opened, but only to connect with a specialized investigation jet bridge. Jaden was invited to disembark first, holding a card that read, Authorized Media Witness, Cabin Transparency Program. He glanced back at Lenora and nodded, as if the two had just witnessed something beyond any headline. At last, when everything had settled, Lenora rose. She walked out of the aircraft slowly, not rushed, not dramatic, just silent, the way a former flight attendant turned CEO chooses to speak. Not through announcements, but through actions. The cabin display changed to one final message. Valair internal review active, Seat 1 a protocol initiated. The iron door of the highest-level executive meeting room at Valair headquarters, known only as the Echo Room, closed heavily behind Lenora Blake. No one spoke. The only sound was her footsteps echoing off the cold, gray stone floor. Along the oval-shaped conference table sat 12 senior members of Valair International's board of directors, all waiting. In front of each person was a thick, spiral-bound document stamped in red. Urgent, Internal Crisis Protocol. It was the Cultural Cabin Audit, Flight 472, the emergency investigative report covering the entirety of what had unfolded on that morning's flight. Lenora did not sit. She placed both hands on the edge of the table and pulled a silver-gray envelope from her jacket pocket, sliding it toward the center. Every eye in the room followed it. "This is my letter of resignation," she said, voice steady and slow. "It becomes effective if any of you refuse to sign the Blake Framework." A visible ripple of shock swept the room. The Blake Framework, a term the board had only briefly heard a few hours earlier, was the comprehensive overhaul of Valair's hiring, training, and crew oversight systems. Not just for flight attendants, but the entire operational culture inside the cabin. It was bold, confrontational, and this time, the CEO wasn't asking for permission. She was forcing a choice. One of the elder board members, Edwin Marlowe, once Lenora's mentor, placed a hand under his chin and opened to the first page of the proposal. He said nothing. 10 minutes passed in a suffocating silence. No one touched their water, no one coughed, no one looked away from the pages. Beyond the soundproof glass, the office building felt frozen in time. Inside, the gravity of power had shifted entirely. Lenora walked to the wall screen and played clips pulled directly from Flight 472. Tessa Landon refusing to scan the 1A boarding pass. Marcus Layton confirming the executive identity had been overwritten. The passengers falling into stunned silence as the truth of the woman in the blue blazer came to light. No commentary was needed. No one in the room could deny it now. This wasn't a minor incident. This was a direct indictment of the system itself. Lenora turned back to the table. "I don't need to keep this seat," she said. "But if I stay, this system changes from the inside out. Not just to save this brand, but to restore the values Valère once promised to the world. Dignity, transparency, and the courage to make things right." A younger member of the board, Jordan Kim, representative of the largest stakeholder fund, looked up. The condescension he had shown in last week's meeting was gone. "If you leave, will the framework still be implemented?" he asked. Lenora looked him straight in the eye. "Number I, take it with me. Sign it, or let me walk out the door with it." A second wave of silence settled over the room, nearly 10 minutes long. The report began passing from hand to hand, and with each person, by the third paragraph, they looked up at her, not with resistance, but with understanding. She wasn't requesting approval. She was drawing a line. The first signature came from Marlowe. He said nothing. He simply looked at her and nodded. Then came Jordan Kim, and then one by one each member followed. 1, 2, 3, until all 12 had signed. The energy in the room shifted, like the air pressure had finally equalized. Lenora didn't smile. She simply nodded, retrieved her unused resignation letter, and placed it back inside the pocket of her navy blue blazer. At that moment, another senior board member, Camilla Ross, known for her long-standing opposition to Lenora, uncapped her fountain pen, sighed, and said, "She doesn't need to command. She is the command."
3 hours after the closed-door meeting in the Echo Room, once the Blake framework had been officially approved and released internally, something unexpected happened. Not from within Valère, but from the outside. Social media, passengers, journalists, and especially those who had followed Flight 472 through leaked footage all erupted at once. A phrase began circulating on X, formerly Twitter. "Hold your row," taken from a quiet comment left by a passenger. "If she held her row, we should all hold ours." Within an hour, the hashtag #Hold Your Row surpassed 500,000 mentions, eventually trending at #1 in the US. Simultaneously, #Seat is Mine began to spread, pulled from a screenshot of a now-viral clip posted by Jaden Knox. Lenora seated upright, silent yet radiant in confidence, in seat 1A, surrounded by stunned eyes. That night, several other airlines, including Aerosky, Monarch Air, and Titan West, issued public statements on social media announcing immediate reviews of their crew training protocols, particularly regarding implicit bias in first-class service. A post from the CEO of Monarch Air read, "We believe every passenger deserves respect, not based on appearance, attire, or surname." On Instagram, hundreds of influencers posted photos of themselves in business-class seats, accompanied by the caption, "This seat doesn't define me, but how you treat me in it does." Meanwhile, Rachel Landon, the flight attendant who had confronted Lenora, appeared on Good Morning America to issue a public apology. She wore a white blouse, light makeup, and held back tears. "I was wrong," she said. "I let unconscious bias guide my behavior. I didn't think my actions would be recorded, and I deeply regret them." But the public wasn't buying it. Just hours after the broadcast, a new video clip emerged, filmed by the passenger in seat 2C. In it, Rachel's voice was clearly heard telling a colleague, "She doesn't belong here. Look at that bag. Probably a fake." The quote poured gasoline on the fire. Reddit, TikTok, and X flooded with backlash, calling out her performance tears and performative remorse. A viral TikToker commented, "You're not sorry because it was wrong. You're sorry because you got caught." At the same time, Valère released the executive summary of the Blake framework to the press, and no one other than Lenora Blake had signed the final page. During a closed press briefing, when asked whether she planned to go on TV to defend herself against the insults, Lenora replied with a single sentence, I'm not asking to be respected. I'm requiring it. That quote was instantly featured in the New York Times, Time magazine, and printed on t-shirts, mugs, and posters within 24 hours. A new initiative called the Seat Reclamation Project launched, aiming to establish clear federal regulations requiring airlines to publicly document and review first-class discrimination complaints. At a high school in Chicago, a social studies teacher played a 14-second clip of Lenora in seat 1A, using it as a prompt. What do you do when you walk into a space everyone thinks you don't belong in? And what should society do to change that? The story had transcended an airline. It had become a movement. Inside Velair HQ, the communications team quickly realized that the momentum wasn't in apologies or PR statements. It was in collective emotion, something no press release could contain. So they chose not to put Lenora on TV. No staged press tours. Instead, anonymous blog entries began appearing on Velair's internal site. Stories from former crew members banned from business class for brand image concerns, from black passengers asked to change seats, and even maintenance workers mistaken for trespassers because of outdated uniforms. Within 48 hours, more than 12,000 testimonies poured into the seat reclamation campaign, from hotels, restaurants, banks, and other service industries. One viral account, a former flight attendant recalled being told by a supervisor to avoid standing near first class because her hair was too curly. The story made the news, then television. She later said, "I'm not asking for money. I just want the next person not to go through what I did." In a short clip, a 12-year-old girl speaking in a classroom said, "I don't think she had to prove anything, because real power doesn't need to shout." Lenora shared the clip on X with a single caption, "Heart." It reached 12 million likes in 4 hours and nearly 100 million views by the end of the day. That same evening, Lenora sent a handwritten letter to every Velair employee, especially to the flight attendants. She didn't name names, didn't call anyone out. She simply wrote, "You were once taught to smile at those wealthier than you, to lower your voice around those with power, and to stay silent in the face of unfairness. Starting today, I hope you'll do the opposite. For yourself." At the bottom, her signature, Lenora. Below it, in small print, "The seat is not the power. How you treat others is." Wednesday morning, 8 a.m., 42nd floor, Velair headquarters, New York. A 20-meter-long boardroom, glass walls on both sides, morning sunlight streaming down onto the walnut table. Shareholders, executive board members, and representatives from investment funds filled the seats. In front of each person was a navy blue binder titled Special Assembly, Executive Emergency Directive 472. Inside was a 38-page report, documents they had only been allowed to read 12 hours prior. Lenora Blake entered right on time. She wasn't wearing a power suit nor carrying any designer handbag. Just the deep blue blazer she had worn on Flight 472, a white shirt, tailored trousers, and a pair of old but polished black flats. No assistant followed her. No legal advisor. She placed a laptop and an ivory envelope on the table, sat down at the head of the room, and said nothing. The room stayed quiet, only the sound of pages turning and coffee cups gently clinking against saucers. "Thank you all for being here," Lenora began, her voice steady and unhurried. "This meeting is not about revenue. It's not about market share. I came here to talk about an invisible yet critical asset: trust. What Flight 472 accidentally revealed was just how fragile the trust is between our passengers and this airline. And if we don't adjust our internal culture now, we will soon lose the ability to adjust anything at all." She opened her laptop and projected the first slide onto the large screen. In white letters against a deep blue background, it read, "Blake Framework, Operational Cabin Culture Reform Structure." Lenora presented without a script. She spoke about the shortcomings in flight attendant training, the misalignment between executive authority and service values. She said that respect is not a reward, but a baseline. She referenced over 2,700 emails received from passengers after the incident, 91% of which described having felt judged based on race, appearance, gender, or health status. and she pointed directly to the final line of the internal investigation report. Cabin culture is built on appearance, not awareness. And therefore, Lenora said, I propose that this board approve the full adoption of the Blake Framework, a comprehensive reform system in 5 phases: audit, education, rotation, feedback, and consequences. She placed a printed copy on the table. If this system is not ready to do that, then I, as CEO, no longer have a reason to lead it. She opened the envelope and pulled out a signed resignation letter, effective in 72 hours if there was no public commitment from the board. The room fell silent. No one dared to be the first to speak. Every board member glanced at one another, avoiding Lenora's gaze, as if searching for an escape route in a room with no exit. But Lenora didn't rush. She sat still, back straight, her eyes calm but sharp, her hands folded together on the table, as if waiting for a storm to break, not from the sky outside, but from the very people in front of her.
At last, the first voice to speak was Reginald Hart, the honorary CEO, who had led Valair for 18 years before handing the reins to Lenora. His hair was white, he held a polished ebony cane, and his eyes still carried the sharpness of a man who had survived multiple hostile takeovers. I've watched the full footage from the flight, he said, his voice low and deliberate, and I'm ashamed, not just because of what happened, but because I used to believe things like that couldn't happen at the airline I helped to build. But now I understand. It's not that we failed once, it's that we allowed failure to become a habit. He looked directly at Lenora. I support you, and if anyone in this room objects, I will transfer my shares into the passenger protection fund you've proposed. We can rebuild, but only if we begin with truth. A chair scraped the floor. Then someone else stood up. Then another. One by one, every board member, from executive directors to investor representatives, began signing the commitment placed before them. No arguments, no hollow smiles, only action, and the solemn silence of people who understood that real power lies not in giving orders, but in owning responsibility before the public. Lenora didn't smile. She said nothing more. She simply folded her resignation letter, placed it back into the envelope, and pulled out a new card, her updated CEO ID badge, now encoded in Valair's new system under the Blake Framework. She placed the card on the table, then looked at the room. This system isn't about controlling flight attendants. It's about protecting dignity of the passengers and of the workers themselves. Then she stood. This meeting is adjourned. Behind her, the large screen displayed one final message, not in red as a warning, but in blue. Valair Cultural Reform, activated. And just 17 minutes later, a leaked video clip from inside that very meeting showing Lenora issuing her ultimatum had gone viral across social media. No one commented about revenue, no hashtag mentioned profit. There was only one sentence echoed everywhere. Leadership doesn't have to shout, it just has to stand its ground. 6 months after Flight 472, the world of aviation was no longer the same. What had taken place in the first-class cabin that day did not remain a mere brand incident. It became the starting point for an industry-wide reconstruction. On the official website of Valair International, a dedicated page was launched. Blake Framework, How We Change from Within. It was not just a statement of ethics, but a complete roadmap to retrain, reevaluate, and reoperate the human systems. From how a flight attendant looks at a passenger, to how a ground staff responds to a complaint, and especially how an airline defines the value of a human being. Lenora was no longer a media figure. She disappeared from public events. But every month when the service culture assessment results were released, a familiar line would appear at the bottom of each chart. This metric exists because someone refused to move. She no longer needed to show up to be present. Her presence now lived in the way flight attendants smiled, in the fact that seat 1A was always accurately reserved, in how an elderly passenger was listened to even before saying a word. By the 3rd month since the Blake Framework had been implemented, a rival airline, Global Skies, issued an unprecedented statement, suspending 24 flights to retrain their entire flight crew in proactive humility and respect for silence. Their CEO said in an interview, "We used to think professionalism meant following the checklist. Now we realize sometimes it means noticing who got left off the list. That statement was shared by millions, including Jaden Knox, the passenger who filmed the cabin video that day. Valair became the first airline in the U.S. to allow passengers to anonymously rate service attitudes throughout their journey. The results sent directly to the Ethics Review Board. One of the new criteria was any passenger in the cabin misjudged due to appearance? If yes, it was deemed a systemic failure, not a personal one. The entire crew involved would be reviewed immediately. No exceptions, no evasion. Lenora still lived in her old apartment in Brooklyn. She hadn't moved to a mansion, hadn't changed cars. Every morning she brewed black coffee, opened her laptop, and read every feedback email forwarded from passengers worldwide. There were thank you notes. There were harsh criticisms. But the message that moved her most came from Elise. The hearing-impaired girl once denied a seat for not responding quickly to the attendant. Elise wrote, "You made people like me, people who can't scream, finally be heard." Lenora didn't reply to that email. She simply printed it out and placed it inside the seat pocket of 1A in the new cabin training center. As a reminder, everything began with silence. On the flight marking the 6-month anniversary, Lenora booked a regular seat like any ordinary passenger. No priority code, no CEO tag. She just wanted to fly with the people. She chose seat 14F by the window, but as she boarded, the captain personally greeted her. A young flight attendant approached and said, "Ms. Blake, please come to seat 1A. It's been held since 4 a.m." Lenora smiled and gently replied, "Today I want to see how everyone works, not where I sit, but whether others get to sit where they deserve." She walked back to 14F, but as the plane began descending into JFK, an elderly man, gray-haired, wearing an old military jacket, stepped into the cabin. The young attendant smiled. "Sir, 1A is yours." He was surprised, paused, and asked, "I thought that seat was reserved for leadership." From the back, Lenora softly said, "No, it's for those who once stood up before the world was ready to listen." When the plane touched down, the entire cabin rose in applause. There was no speech, no media. But in the faint light reflecting off the windows, Lenora's eyes sparkled. She glanced toward the small electronic panel beside seat 1A, where thousands of misunderstandings, prejudices, and insults had once gathered. And now engraved in steel were the words, "She sat. She didn't move." And the sky changed. Because sometimes the only thing a person truly needs isn't an apology, isn't a special gesture, but simply a seat that reflects the worth they deserve. Not everyone can change an entire system like Lenora Blake, but each of us can do one thing. Don't let silence become complicity. If you've ever been judged by your appearance, turned away because someone didn't think you belonged, then this story was for you. And if it lifted a weight from your chest, reminded you that fairness can be restored, or simply made you believe in kindness again, leave us a comment below. Tell us, who were you in this story? The one they dismissed, or the one who quietly spoke up? Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more powerful stories like this. Stories that make the world a little more human, one story at a time. And if you know someone who needs to hear "you deserve better," share this video with them, because today they might need it more than you know.